Hi, Helene Reingold again, Conversation with Art. We're going to do part two of Portraiture through history. This portrait is arguably the most famous portrait in art history. I don't even have to tell you the name. I don't even have to tell you who the artist is. But I'm going to give you a quote by Oscar Wilde about portraiture. Every portrait that is painted with feeling is a portrait of the artist, not of the sitter. Every portrait that is painted with feeling is a portrait of the artist, not of the sitter. Leonardo da Vinci, born in the town of Vinci, an illegitimate child. And he only did 15 paintings that survive. 15. And yet everyone throughout the world recognizes her. La Gioconda, the miller's wife. Half-body portrait, because as I told you when we talked about self-portraiture, only the nobility would have a full-body portrait at this time. Only the nobility. Mona Lisa. Some people think that she had an issue with her eye. An issue with her eyes. Some people think she had a lazy eye, known as strabismus. I leave it up to you to decide. Leonardo developed a technique, an oil painting technique called sfumata. S-F-U-M-A-T-O, sfumata. Smoky oil technique. This is not signed, it's not dated, and we feel that it took him about 20 years to complete. Mona Lisa. I'm sorry. A very young girl, 15, 16. A betrothal portrait, meant to present to a wealthy older man so that he could decide if he in fact wanted to marry her or not. Also by Leonardo da Vinci. The name of this painting is Ginevra de Benci. Ginevra de Benci. I'd like you to look at the high forehead. High foreheads were considered signs of intelligence. And if a woman didn't have a high forehead naturally, she would pluck the hair around her hairline to give us the feeling that she was intelligent. This is basically an advertisement, so that this older gentleman, often 2 or 3 times the age of this young lady, would be interested in marrying her. Ginevra de Benci. This is oil on wood, and we did talk about that last time. Before artists became comfortable with canvas, they painted oil on wood. We have juniper bushes in the background because Ginevra is Italian for juniper. And on the back of this, known in the art world as Enverso, E-N-V-E-R-S-O, we have a quote by her. Beauty adorns virtue. Beauty adorns virtue. She was a poet. The marriage turned out to be very unhappy, no children, and she dies rather young. Ginevra de Benci. I think this is a lovely portrait. I think this is even more interesting than Mona, but that's my opinion. Ginevra da Benci. She's very pale. That's because wealthy people never went outside to work. They never got tan. Was another way we know that she's very wealthy. She doesn't look very happy, does she? No. Ginevra da Benci. A painting of the artist's daughter, Maria. Not meant to be a portrait, meant to be a study, known as a trony, Tronie, a trony. This is a study for a larger, different painting. This artist uses his two favorite colors, blue and yellow. This is called The Girl with the Pearl Earring. Do we know who painted it? Johannes Vermeer. Dutch. An artist who dies at the age of 43, only doing about 36 or 37 paintings that we know of, that we can verify. And because he didn't sell very many of his paintings, he also was an art dealer and a tavern keeper. He lived in a house owned by his mother-in-law with his wife and 15 children. His studio was on the top floor, and I guess perhaps he went upstairs to paint to get away from everybody. Possible? What makes this so fascinating to people? That a book and a movie were done. Is it her expression? Is it that she's just about almost to say something? Is it the large highlighted pearl? Pearls are symbols of virginity and fidelity. Remember what Wilde said, every portrait that is painted with feeling is a portrait of the artist, not of the sitter. Maria Vermeer, Girl with the Pearl Earring, a trony. A woman with a size 16 waist, known for her beauty, who comes from New Orleans. She's a Creole. She comes from New Orleans to Paris specifically to marry a wealthy older man, and she does. She marries Monsieur Guatreau, and her name is Amélie. But history knows her as Madame X. This is a portrait by John Singer Sargent. We saw his self-portrait in the last program. He was the portrait artist of the wealthy and the famous. So, Madame Guatreau comes to Paris looking for a wealthy husband. And in fact, Sargent tells us that because around her head is a little tiara with a half moon, a gold half moon If you know your goddesses, the half moon represents Diana, the goddess of the hunt. And in fact, that's what she did. She hunted for the wealthy husband. She's known for her profile, very famous. And wealthy women put lavender white powder on their skin so that they would appear extremely pale. Remember Ginevra? Pale, never out in the sun, certainly don't work. But he does leave a little bit of a red ear. Does he like this woman? Or is he actually telling us what he feels about her when we look at this portrait? I want you also to notice that the strap here is significantly different than the strap here. Why is that? This is the second version of Madame X. The first version that Sargent did had the strap down here. When her mother saw that, she was horrified. She said, "You've painted my daughter as if she's getting undressed." She insisted he paint a second version. He does, puts the strap over here, but certainly wants us to know that they're different. This was such a scandal that Sargent ends up going to England and spends the rest of his artistic life primarily in England, not in France. Madame X. Profile. She's got a wedding ring on her finger, highlighted in yellow for gold. When I work with children, I often ask them, would you want this woman to be your mother? Talk about the body language. How does she feel about herself? Would this woman come in and give you a hug and a kiss at night? Madame X. John Singer Sargent. Looking carefully, this tells us an awful lot about what these people do for a living. This was painted by this woman's art teacher. She's an artist, and we have a portfolio here, right next to her. What does this gentleman do for a living? Yes, he's a scientist. And this gentleman's name is Lavoisier, and he in fact discovers oxygen. And who might this woman be, this female artist that seems to know him very well? Yes, it's his wife. And the name of the painting is Lavoisier and his wife. Who is the more important person in this double portrait? Is it Lavoisier, the famous scientist, or is it the wife, whose name we at this point don't know? If you thought the wife, good for you. She's looking right at us. She's standing. The light is primarily on her, and she's pretty much in the center. Jacques-Louis David, her art teacher, the favorite artist of Napoleon Bonaparte, by the way, wants all of our attention on her. He's telling us things about her. The vertical lines on the wall point to her. The crease in this wonderful tablecloth points to her. His leg points to her. His quill pen points to her. The direction of his gaze points to her. And yet the painting is known as Lavoisier and his wife. We know about when he lived. Notice the hairstyle. If you thought George Washington, you were right on. Lavoisier was not only a famous scientist, he also worked for the King of France, for Louis XVI. And he collected taxes. And when the revolution came, he lost his head. Nobody likes tax collectors, do they? She escapes to England. She lives till the age of 78 years old. Lavoisier and his wife. Notice anything interesting about the face? Does it remind you of sort of a mask? An African mask? The artist who painted this was a very good friend to this woman. He met Henri Matisse at her weekly salon. Gertrude Stein, an American expatriate, a very wealthy woman who had salons in her home every week. And if you were anybody who was anybody in Paris in the art world, you wanted an invitation. Matisse came every week. Pablo Picasso came one evening, met Matisse, and made an arrangement to go to a museum to look at African art. Mask-like. Gertrude Stein comes from Pennsylvania. Her money comes from railroads. Married to Alice B. Toklas. How does he paint her? Is it flattering? Do we know anything about this woman, her character? Does he paint her strong, determined? She sat for him 90 times, and he never got the face right. 90 times. He went away for the summer, came back in the fall, and he said, Gertrude, I'm done. I've done it without another sitting. She came to look at it. This is almost life-size. She came to look at it. She loved it. Her friend said, this is horrible. Doesn't look like you at all. Let me tell you what Gertrude said. It is I, and the only reproduction of me, which is always I for me. She kept this portrait her whole life, and in her will, when she died in 1947, she gave it to the Metropolitan, which is where it is now. Every portrait that is painted with feeling is a portrait of the artist, not of the sitter. a lovely nude. The French name is nu couché, nude on the couch. The artist who did this did 22 nudes. This is his most famous. He had a solo show. His paintings were hung in the window of the gallery, and the show was closed down by the Parisian police because they considered it indecent. Rather realistic. Not only pubic hair, but hair under the arms. People found that rather offensive. Nu couché. Do you know who painted this? I'm going to give you a description of him. Neurotic, spoiled, tubercular, drug addicted, woman beating, poverty stricken, but very, very handsome and a very talented artist. Born in Italy, Jewish. This is Amedeo Modigliani. Amedeo Modigliani. He dies at the age of 36, and 3 days after his death, his young wife, who is 19 and pregnant, 8 months pregnant, throws herself off the roof of his studio and dies, commits suicide. Amedeo Modigliani. There was an attempt to put this portrait on a postage stamp in the United States in 1950, and it was considered indecent, never printed. Modigliani is one of the easiest artists to forge, and of the 340 paintings he did, some people think that perhaps half are forgeries. Let's go back. Let's look a little bit more closely. I hope you notice the high forehead. I hope you notice the background, which is cool. Foreground is warm, so she's coming towards us. Coming towards us. This is atmospheric perspective. She's at the Louvre. She's not very big. She's behind bulletproof glass. And if you go, you can't get very close. Which is really too bad. Leonardo da Vinci. Bust portrait, upper torso, shoulders and head, high forehead, intelligent, long neck, considered a sign of beauty. A portrait that was, as I said, basically an advertisement for this young lady. Beauty adorns virtue. The artist's daughter, Maria. In the artist's favorite colors, blue and yellow. Johannes Vermeer. Holland at this time did lots of trading with the Middle East, and perhaps you see something that hints of that Mideastern culture. She's just almost about to speak. She really does look approachable and very vulnerable and very human. Johannes Vermeer, father of 15 children, whose studio was on the 3rd floor with the door closed so that he could paint. Madame X, Amélie Gautreau. Famous beauty. We already know that Sargent considered her a huntress, considered her vain, arrogant, conceited, proud. We can supply all sorts of adjectives here, but certainly someone that's not very approachable. With her 16-inch waist, born in Louisiana. Lavoisier and his wife. An artist, a chemist. When they married, he was 27 and she was 13. This painting was done when she was in her early 20s, and he is in his late middle 30s. Lost his head to the French Revolution, not because of the chemistry, but because of collecting the taxes. Gertrude Stein. So well known that when the Germans took over Paris, she, Gertrude, and her lover, Alice B. Toklas, both of whom were Jewish, were allowed to leave and live out the war in a farm in a suburb of Paris. She locked her apartment with this picture on the wall, and when the war was over, she came back and the apartment had been untouched. That's how famous she was. Gertrude Stein. Her favorite portrait. And when people said to Picasso, "But she doesn't look like that," he said, "Oh, but she will. She will." And Amedeo Modigliani, an artist who basically burned himself out with his drinking and his drugs and his physical ailments. But oh my, what he could do with a line. With one line, what he could do with a line. Yes. I hope you enjoyed this. I was thrilled to work with you with portraits and selfies. Be well, and we'll see you again. Thank you.